Hi and good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody is starting to come in and to join today's webinar. So hi and welcome. It's a bit of a dark, grey, dull afternoon here, but I hope it's a bit better where you are. So without further ado, really, today's session is very much around making sense of extended furlough. So I'm going to do my very best, my absolute best, to make it as straightforward and simple as possible. If it's okay with everybody, I will take questions at the end. So I'm going to go through the material first, and then I'll take any questions. I've had a couple of questions submitted, but I will, as I say, take some questions from you at the end. If you do have any questions at all and you want to submit your questions, then if you can just use the chat box, the chat function here, that would be fabulous. And then I'll keep a bit of an eye on that as well as we're going through. But like I say, I'll take any sort of significant questions at the end. Brilliant. So without further ado, then I'm going to start by sharing my screen, which is only the host, and that's fine. Bear with me while we get this sorted. Screen share. Brilliant. Okie doke. So go away. There we go. Brilliant. So as I say, today is very much around making sense of the extended furlough scheme, aka the coronavirus job retention scheme, all these acronyms that we've got to get to grips with and learn about, which is interesting, shall we say. So I thought it would be helpful just simply, let me do that. Does that work? Okay, let me see. Right, here we go. Better. So making sense of extended furlough, aka job retention scheme, as we said, let's recap first and foremost, so we're sure where we are. As we know and as we all remember, seems like a million years ago already, furlough was due to come to an end on the 31st of October. But fortunately, whatever way you look at it, and very much a last-minute.com, as I've affectionately called it here, decision on to extend furlough announced on the 31st of October, and the extension to take effect from the 1st of November. So in essence, it's really important to say this, actually, because I think there were a few queries, particularly because lockdown here in England didn't take effect until the 5th of November, that there is absolutely no gap in eligibility of support between the two furlough schemes. So the previous furlough and the extended furlough, if you like, there is no gap at all in eligibility of support. So that's a really important question that I thought would be helpful to answer up front. Okay, so one sort of effectively ended on the 31st of October, the next one kicked in the following day. So is it really just the same furlough scheme? So what the government policy says, believe it or not, is this is an extension of the CJRS, and the scheme rules will remain the same, ... except where we say otherwise. So it's kind of the same furlough scheme. It's also kind of not, in fairness. It has got some changes, which we'll talk through. Okay. And how long will it be this time? So the extension itself is actually in place until the 31st of March next year, which is actually over a year since original furlough came in, if you remember that far back in the mists of time. But the policy guidance we have currently is actually only in place till the 31st of January. So what does that tell us? That essentially tells us that it may well change again. A bit like, if you remember, when furlough was first announced in March of this year, it was as per normal, and then by June we were starting to see some changes. Potentially by January, we'll see some changes to this extension. Okay, so the government are forewarning of possible changes, and they are saying that they will review the policy in January to decide whether economic circumstances are improving enough to ask employers to contribute more. I actually also think that take up will be a big part of the decision making. So when they actually look at who's taken up the extended furlough scheme, how much it's costing the public purse, as it were, I think at that point then they'll make some more decisions in terms of, contributions from employers, etc. As it stands at the moment, we are projecting and expecting some changes, probably to be announced in January, to take effect from February, so for the last 2 months of the scheme. So just to be really, really clear then, how much you can claim. So for claim periods running up to January, as we've said, employees will receive 80% of their usual salary for hours not worked. So we actually are returning to the highest level of furlough claim that we had in place from March to June this year. March to August, I beg your pardon. And then, as we said, in January, it might actually change again. And it's up to that maximum cap of £2,500 per month. So just to be clear again, what you need to pay for hours worked, you pay the individual as normal, as well as their national insurance and pension contributions. Okay. For any hours not worked, you as the employer pay the NI and pension contributions, and the government, as we know, will pay that 80%, or certainly you'll pay it and then you'll be reimbursed through the claim scheme. What about topping up? This is a common question. So you're not absolutely not required to top up towards the to contribute towards the 80%, and you're not required to top up either to 100%. But of course, you can choose to if you want to. That is optional and it's up to you. In terms of eligibility, then we get into a bit of the detail. Person must have been employed and on your PAYE payroll on the 30th of October. You must have made a real-time information and RTI submission to HMRC between the 20th of March and the 30th of October to notify payment of earnings for that employee, but they can be on any type of employment contract. And in terms of flexibility, because again, this was really important, so the flexible furlough scheme is absolutely still valid. You can use the scheme flexibly for employees for any amount of time or any shift pattern, provided you agree the hours worked with the employee, which we'll talk about in more detail. There's no minimum furlough period. That's been another question that's come up a lot. There is absolutely no minimum furlough period. Flexible furlough agreements can last for any amount of time, and employees can enter into a flexible furlough agreement more than once. So they can be on furlough or on flexi furlough, and then they can go back to work, and then they can go back on flexi furlough again, or indeed full furlough. So there's quite a bit of flexibility built into this extension. I thought it might be useful just to look in brief about an employee who's unable to work, just again for clarity and to answer some of those key kind of burning questions. So employees can be furloughed if they are shielding in line with public health guidance, if they are staying at home with someone who is shielding, or if they have caring responsibilities resulting from coronavirus, including looking after children. So in the example that a parent has a small child and the school is closed for some reason, then certainly you have the choice to furlough that employee rather than insist that they're on unpaid leave. It's a choice that you can make, and legitimately you can furlough them in those circumstances. Short-term sickness absence, now this is an interesting one. The guidance is really clear in the sense that it says the CJRS is not intended for short-term sickness absence. However, it then goes on to say, if you do want to furlough employees for business reasons and they're currently off sick, you could put them on furlough. Now, the way I interpret that is, if somebody was sick and they have a job that they could be doing, then technically they should be on SSP. If they are on sick and there isn't a job that they could be doing, then they are legitimately entitled to the furlough. But ultimately, it's one of those really grey areas that my advice to everyone is make sure whatever decisions you do make, you have your ducks in a row, you keep your records, and you're able to justify to HMRC whatever decision you do make. What happens about a furloughed employee who becomes ill? So a furloughed employee who becomes ill for coronavirus or any other reason has got to be paid at least SSP. But again, it's your decision whether you to move them to SSP or keep them on furlough. So that's when you've already furloughed somebody, they ring in, they tell you they become ill. It's your choice whether to say, right, well, it's now SSP, or actually you can stay on furlough. Again, just make your decision, but keep records and be really clear as to the reasons why you've made those decisions would be my advice. So while on furlough, an employee cannot do any work for the employer that makes money or provides services, same as before, and can't work for any organisation linked or associated with the employer. It's really clear, can't do any work that would be resulting in making money. They can, however, take part in training, they can volunteer for another employer or or organisation, and they can work for another employer if they're contractually allowed to do it. So again, they've got some options there. Holiday is always a big question as well. So just to be really clear on that too, employee can take holiday while on furlough, no problem at all with that. If on flexi furlough, the hours taken as holiday during the claim period should be counted as the furloughed hours and not the working hours. Makes sense. And employees should not be placed on furlough simply because they're on holiday for that period. Important point to make. Holiday pay, just to be really clear, so working time regulations require holiday pay to be paid at the employee's normal rate of pay, or where that rate of pay varies, calculated on the basis of their average pay received in the last 52 working weeks. So if a furloughed employee takes holiday, then you should be paying the usual holiday pay in accordance with the working time regulations. So even though you would reclaim 80%, you must top up to the 100% and make sure that it's the usual holiday pay. Okie doke. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about redundancies as well, because obviously this has been a massively hot topic throughout the year, and I suspect, unfortunately, will continue to be for many of you. You know, there'll be those really tough business decisions to make. Where you must make redundancy, this is what the government guidance says currently, where you must make redundancies, you should do so in accordance with the normal rules. So there's no circumnavigating the rules, there's no cutting anything short here. And that includes giving a notice period and consulting staff before you make your final decision. So business as normal as far as redundancies are concerned. So you can continue to claim for a furloughed employee who's serving a statutory notice period. However, grants cannot be used to substitute redundancy payments. So essentially what's that saying there is that they're saying that you can use your furlough pay towards the notice pay, but you can't use it towards the statutory redundancy pay, which in fairness hasn't changed from before. However, hold on to your hats, because this bit is entirely new, and this came out after 6 p.m. last night, actually, in one of the 13 documents of new guidance or new updated guidance that the government have produced, as I say, late yesterday evening. So this is new news, is kind of hot off the press. What they're actually doing is reviewing whether or not you as an employer should be eligible to claim furlough for somebody who's serving a contractual or statutory notice period. And it is very possible that they will change their approach in December. So late this month, late November, we'll be looking at potentially some changes there, which could mean that if you have somebody on furlough that you then made redundant, that you may not be able to claim furlough for their notice period. Or indeed you may be able to claim some furlough, but not all. So we're waiting for further details on that. But that is new. The fact that they're even alarmingly kind of threatening to review it is new in itself, okay, because it wasn't under question previously. And again, this is just kind of reiteration, really. If you make someone redundant, then their statutory redundancy and notice pay should be based on their normal wage and not on any reduced furlough wage. So that was, again, something that was clarified over the summer months for us because there were some questions. So having kind of done a bit of that, we're going to talk a little bit about the practical steps that you should be doing now if you want to take advantage of the furlough scheme, that is. So you need to decide on any employees that you want to go on furlough, and remember your eligibility criteria, which we talked about in terms of length of service and start date and RTI submissions. I would say always communicate in good time, verbally first if you can to your employees, and then follow up, and a written agreement must be issued. So I'll talk a little bit more about that written agreement. So you must have confirmed to each employee in writing that they've been furloughed or flexi-furloughed. You must make sure that the agreement is consistent with employment equality and discrimination laws. You must keep a written record of the agreement for 5 years, big point. And you must keep records of how many hours people work and the hours that they're furloughed for 6 years. So that tells me that HMRC are planning to look at this for at least the next 5 to 6 years and audit claims and review claims, etc. So it's really important that that record keeping is good and is up to date. Important points to note, you don't have to request a written response from your employee, although I would suggest it's still good practice to make sure that they've received the email or received the letter that you've sent them with the agreement on it. And of course, just to clarify again, you don't have to place all of your employees on furlough. It is a choice that you can make in terms of who does and who doesn't go on furlough. And in fact, as before, you can even rotate your workforce from furlough to working if it's appropriate to do that. Your terms of your agreement must reflect the hours that the employee has actually worked or not worked over the period of the agreement. And essentially, you have to satisfy the terms of the job retention scheme so you can make a claim in relation to the hours that they haven't worked. So the terms of the agreement must be quite tight, really, must be quite specific in order to satisfy all of these requirements. This is a good question. I've been asked this just this week around essentially what I'm calling retro furlough. So whether or not here and now on the 11th of November, you can actually put somebody on furlough and effectively backdate that. And the answer is yes. You can retrospectively furlough an employee from the 1st of November and claim from the 1st of November. However, the caveat is the written agreement that you issue to them must be done by this Friday. So you haven't got long. If you do plan to put people on furlough and retrospectively do it from the 1st of November, and perhaps you were waiting for some more information or some more guidance, etc., then you must give them a written agreement by Friday in order to be able to backdate it in effect from the 1st of November. Hopefully that makes pretty good sense. I want to talk a little bit about details of claims. So claim period must start and end within the same calendar month. If the pay period includes days in more than 1 month, then you must do separate claims. So each claim must be calculated separately, as we've said. Claim periods can't overlap, and any employees claimed for will need to be included in each separate claim made. Okay. November claims, really importantly, you will be able to, from 8 a.m. this morning, put in claims. So you can do it in arrears for the period from the 1st to the 11th, and then in advance thereafter, should you choose to. Okay. The claim deadline, so for claims up to the 31st of October, your claim deadline is the 30th of November. So for the previous non-extended furlough, if you like, normal furlough, up to the 31st of October, your 30th of November is your cutoff point. For any November claims, you must submit your claim by the 14th of December. And then for subsequent months, it's by the 14th of the following month. Okay, really important again to be aware of those deadlines to get those claims in. And payment is going to be due. They're anticipating around 6 working days after the after claims have been submitted. Okay. Talking a little bit around employee being previously furloughed. So if the people that you're putting on furlough have previously been on furlough, then you simply use the same calculations for their reference pay and their usual hours as before. That bit does not change. If someone's new to being furloughed, now these are really, really important points actually. You don't have to, you personally as an employer do not have to have used the job retention scheme previously in order to be able to use it now. So that's good. And if you have an employee who now meets the criteria but wasn't previously furloughed, there are some alternative calculations for reference pay and usual hours, which I'm going to explain now. So, but really, really importantly, you don't have to have used the retention scheme previously, and the employee themselves, the individual, doesn't have to have been on the CGRS on the furlough previously either. Okay. So somebody who's newly furloughed on a fixed salary, you need to calculate the 80% of their wages payable in the last pay period ending on or before 30th of October. The usual hours will be their contracted hours worked in the last pay period, again ending on or before 30th of October. If they're newly furloughed but they're on variable hours, then it's 80% of the average payable between the start date of their employment, or 6th of April, whichever is later, and the date before the furlough period begins. And the usual hours will be the average hours worked between the start date of the 2021 tax year, i.e. 6th of April, and the day before the furlough period. Okay. What's this about re-employment? Now, I don't know whether any of you have already been approached about re-employment. Martin Lewis, bless him, is doing his level best to encourage everybody to reapproach their employers and ask about re-employment. So if you had an employee who was on your payroll on the 23rd of September, but was then made redundant or stopped working for any reason thereafter, they can be re-employed and claimed for. Important to know, you must have made an RTI submission for them between 20th of March and 23rd of September. And it also applies if a fixed term contract came to an end after the 23rd of September. I have huge reservations, if I'm honest, about re-employment, but ultimately it will be right for some people, it won't be right for others. So I think particularly worth a lot of consideration rather than a knee-jerk yes or no reaction. I think sometimes people will agree to it to kind of please the ex-employee, but it's really important to kind of be really careful about making those decisions. Okay. And this is also new. Somebody told me today it is a name and shame. I'm not too sure about the shame bit, but certainly the name bit is relevant. So what's going to happen from next month is HMRC will publish employer names for companies and LLPs, and the company registration number of those who have made claims under the scheme from December onwards. So in essence, there'll be a public list of everyone who's claimed on furlough from December onwards. So that's again new. It was in the information that was issued late last evening. It's an interesting move for lots of reasons, I think. So a couple of final questions then, and then I'll take questions from people. So where has the job support scheme gone? This wonderful job support scheme that we were all so eagerly learning about. The job support scheme closed, the job support scheme open. We had agreements, we had everything in place. Unfortunately, it has been suspended. So at this point in time, as we've said previously, the extended furlough is in place until the end of March, in whatever guise that might be by that point. But certainly the JSS, the job support scheme, has been temporarily suspended. Don't hold me to this, but I strongly suspect that it will disappear completely. I can't see it becoming any, turning into anything now after the end of March. I may be wrong, I often am. Well, not often, sometimes. What about the job retention bonus? So as you remember, the job retention bonus was this wonderful £1,000 that was waved in front of everybody's noses to say, if you retain people to the end of January, you'll receive a £1,000 bonus in February as a thank you for essentially for retaining that person. So the purpose of that was really to encourage you to keep people in work until at least January. However, the extended furlough, the extended CJRS replaces the job retention bonus, so there will be no additional payment, I'm afraid. The government guidance that we've seen refers to a retention incentive to be deployed at the appropriate time. What that might be, what the details of that might be, remain to be seen at this point in time. All right. So just before we move on to questions, I just wanted to make this offer to everyone, and this is really as a thank you for registering and coming along today, and for reading the emails and the updates that I send out on a semi-regular basis around what's going on. Hopefully you'll find them informative and useful. So I'm offering a completely free of charge 30-minute consultation with me. Probably going to be on furlough, but again, I'm happy to open that up to any sort of general HR related issue that you might want to chat through with me. My email address is there, and obviously I'm in contact with you, so I'll be sending you today's recording as well, but just email me to book that and we'll get something booked in the diary for you. But if that's of any benefit to anyone, then obviously I'd be really happy to have a chat. And then we'll move on to questions. You've got questions, I've got answers, and I hope I have anyway, let me put it that way. So I'm just going to stop sharing the screen for just a second. And we've got a question here. If you had a flexible furlough agreement in place with employees prior to November, i.e. for July onwards period, do you still need to do another one from 1st of November? Great question, Karen, thank you. The answer is it kind of depends what your original agreement said. Sorry, I know that's a bit of a response. It depends. In all honesty, and if you want me to take a look at a flexible furlough agreement that you might have had, then I'm happy to do that. But basically, it should be okay, but it will depend on the wording, and it would be worth obviously having a more detailed look at it just to make sure. Typically, the flexible furlough agreements that were already in place, I would have thought should be fine, but it would be worth just double checking it, Karen, I think. Okay, if that's all right. Anyone got any other questions? If you want to put your hand up or wave or just add a question in the chat box there, that'd be brilliant. I did have one question which I mentioned on email, and it was around eligibility, and it was around whether people whether they had to be on furlough previously or not in order to be eligible. And as I said in the conversation just now and in the presentation, no. Completely new people can now be furloughed, and completely new employers can now take advantage of the furlough scheme, even if they haven't done previously. So it's open to everyone in effect. Okay, Victoria, hi, nice to see you. We have a number of employees wanting to be furloughed flexibly as they're simply struggling to return from full-time furlough. Presumably, if there's work to do, then this is a no. Brilliant question. I would say that lots of people have lots of reasons for asking to be furloughed and indeed to be flexibly furloughed. I would, in all honesty, say that the business needs have got to come first. So if there is work to be done, then I would ideally look to compromise if you can on this and sort of look to agree a happy medium, as it were. But in all honesty, I would say that if there's work to be done and you want people to come in and do it, then I would be saying no, they're not entitled to furlough, to be honest, because it's got to be a business decision. And ultimately, without being smart about employees or anything else, you're the one that's going to have to answer to HMRC with the decisions that you made in terms of putting people on furlough. And if it's obvious and clearly demonstrable that there was work to be done and you chose not to give that work, but you chose to put people on furlough, then I think that might cause a few questions, if I'm honest. Karen, it was quite an open-ended agreement. I think it's okay. Get time to double check it. Absolutely, always best. Double check it. Steve, hi Steve. Could you run through furlough and holiday again? I missed a bit of that. There was a can't do bit which I didn't catch. Was there? Oh, bear with me a second. Then I'm just going to whiz back to holiday. Bear with me. Oh, I see. Yes, okay. So what I'd essentially said, Steve, is that employees can take holiday while they're on furlough, okay. And if they're on flexi furlough, then the holiday hours are allocated out of the unworked hours, i.e. the furloughed hours rather than the worked hours. My point was that you should not simply put somebody on furlough because they're on holiday. So if there is work to be done, but somebody has already booked holiday, then it is not within the spirit of this scheme, and indeed the government guidance is actually quite clear on it, to say that you should not put somebody on furlough to allow you to recover 80% of their holiday pay, if you like. So if there's no work or not enough work and they're on flexi furlough anyway, then yes, they can take holiday. If they're on holiday, but otherwise they would normally be full-time at work, then it's not a case for furlough. Does that make more sense? Hopefully. What I'm going to do actually after this is, as well as sending out the recording, I'll also send you a PDF of my slides, so you've got all of the information. I recognise, I mean, there's 47 slides here, so I recognise I've put a lot of info and a lot of detail that you might have been sort of scribbling to try and catch and put down, etc., in notes form. So if it's of any benefit, I'm happy to PDF the slides and send them out to you as well, so you've got that to refer back to. But as I say, specifically on that question, Steve, it was around, somebody who's already on furlough can have holiday, but somebody who's already on holiday shouldn't be put on furlough. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Oh, brilliant. Okay, so Pauline, thank you, Pauline. Many of our team have lots of holidays outstanding. Are we able to enforce that they use them rather than carry over? Brilliant question. Okay. So you'll know, I'm sure, that the government have said that if employees get to the end of their holiday year and they haven't been able to use all of their holiday because of coronavirus, they should be allowed to carry it over. Okay, so that's one thing. As an employer, yes, you absolutely can insist that holiday is taken in the current holiday year, but there is a caveat to that. So you've got to give them notice that they are required to take holiday. So if somebody has, let's just say, 5 days holiday to take, as long as you give them 10 days notice, i.e. twice as much notice as the amount of holiday, then you are absolutely within your rights to say you must take holiday of your 5 days, and we're giving you 10 days notice of that. So yes, Pauline, you can enforce the use of holidays. I mean, I think typically when you explain to people that you really would like them to take their holiday and it would be really beneficial to the business, and you can start next year refresh, etc., 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 then I think that's more inclined to, people are probably more inclined to go along with it rather than feel that they're being forced to take their holidays as such. But yes, technically from a legal point of view, you can enforce holiday if it comes to that and if you need to. But it's important to bear that notice period in mind. Steve, if work is iffy, would it be best to put employees on furlough just in case? Yeah, you could do. I mean, absolutely, that's what the scheme is there for. If you're at all worried about your ability to give full-time work, then obviously there's flexi furlough, which could result in, let's just say for argument's sake, we're here on Wednesday the 11th. If from Monday the 16th, Steve, you're thinking, actually, we haven't necessarily got enough for everybody for the week, then you could essentially say, right, well, as of next week, you're going to work 20 of your 40 hours and work flexibly across the week and see how that goes, and then simply claim for 20 unworked hours on furlough as of next week. The whole point about the flexibility of the scheme is that it does allow you to do that. So if you're at all worried and would otherwise be making more permanent decisions about employees and about their kind of standing in the business in terms of redundancies, etc., then furlough is there exactly for that reason. But if you don't need to use it, then obviously they're saying, please don't, if you don't need to, kind of thing. They're trying to encourage people to only use it sensibly if they absolutely need to. Okie dokes. Any more questions, comments? Anything at all anybody wants to ask? I'm putting you on the spot, aren't I? Asking you to type quickly when I can just chat things through. Brilliant. Have you got to state or agree hours in advance? In an ideal world, yes, if you can. If you know the working pattern on a flexi furlough perspective, if you know the working pattern you want to agree, then yes. If not, and you're simply issuing an agreement that says we'd like you to be on flexi furlough days and hours and times to be agreed, that's fine too, provided you do then later follow up with them in writing to say, as of Monday the 16th, these are the days and hours that I would like you to work. So yes, you don't have to state it in advance. If you know it in advance, then it makes sense to state it. If you don't, then you can obviously follow up afterwards, provided you do put it in writing to people. Okay. Brilliant. Well, unless anyone's got anything else to chip in on, I think we're about done. That is an absolute whistle-stop tour, I recognise. And as I say, there's lots of information there to take on board, lots of detail. I'll send out the PDF of all of the slides, as I've said. I'll also send out the link to the recording of today's webinar. If you want to take me up on that free 30 minutes, please do. By all means, I'm more than happy to book that in with you and have a chat. Otherwise, I will say thank you all very much for attending, as always. It's been great. Hopefully you've got something useful from it, some useful information, even if it's you know, tearing your hair out even more than you otherwise would have been. There is lots of government guidance, as I say, that was updated last night, that was issued. So there's a lot of very, very, very specific detail that I just haven't had the time to go into, in all truth. But it is easily accessible. And if you do get stuck and you're not quite sure on something, then by all means, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to signpoint in the right direction, particularly if it's something very payroll specific, for example. You know, payroll, understandably, like myself, are going quite grey trying to deal with everyone's questions and answer everyone's queries. Brilliant. Well, I'm going to end the webinar there then. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Really, really great to see you all, as always. And yeah, I will be doing, I'll actually, just to let you know, I haven't really announced it yet, but I'm planning to do a series of webinars over next year. So I've got 12 coming up, which I'm sure you'll be delighted to know. So I've got a whole calendar of webinars on other topics and subjects, etc., that I will be issuing in due course. So if any of those are of interest, you want to come along, then I'd love to see you, as always. Thanks ever so much, everybody, and I will see you soon. Thanks then. Bye-bye.